moving in to the AFC North, we have the Baltimore Ravens. We both have Super Bowl contender. I mean, year 2 of the Todd Monken offense. They do lose OBJ, but they get Derrick Henry. I'm interested to see how they kind of patch that line together, but the Ravens have been kind of knocking on that door the last couple years, and it just always feels like they have not been able to get over the hump. Maybe year 2 in this offense, they can do it. I know, their defense is still going to be really, really good, especially, it might be hard to transition after losing Mike Macdonald, but you hope that you can at least keep some of the defense. Even if the defense is 80% as good as it was last year, you're in pretty good shape.
Well, no, absolutely. And the Ravens are just one of those rosters where it's like there's really, and it's hard. There's very few rosters like this, if any more besides the Ravens. Maybe again, maybe the Lions, where you're looking, you're like, there's really actually like no weak points of the roster. Like there are points of the roster that are weaker than others, but there are no weak points on this roster. Like assuming that Nate Wiggins comes in and is just an average level pro, there's at his floor, which hopefully he's not, hopefully he's higher than that for Ravens fan. But you get my point. Like the reality is there's no weak points on the roster. When there's no weak points on your roster and you have the 2-time MVP leading the backfield, I mean, right? How could I not have you as a Super Bowl contender?
Yeah, I think that's the thing is like when we're looking at these team ceilings, if everything goes right, they have the makeup to be that type of team. And Lamar won his second MVP last year. I think at this point, I will say the personal accolades, like he's reached what he needs to reach. Like he has to get a ring, and I think he probably understands that. My kind of issue on the offense and what scares me the most before we move on to the next team is I really, really, really do think they need like a big alpha wide receiver one. I really struggle to see like Zay Flowers being that guy that is just going to scare cornerbacks, like I'm not saying, they should have went and grabbed like a Keon Coleman or anything like that. But like, I mean, I know it's against kind of the Ravens forte to go and trade picks, but I can't think of anybody, but like, if you were able to trade like a first round pick for a guy of like a T Higgins stature to put him next to Zay Flowers, like you're telling me that doesn't instantly make them favorites?
Well, no, 100%. And I think the biggest thing too is like when you say it, it makes me think also like because the Ravens a lot of the time have Zay out at X or Y, and it's like to your point, I think he will be, not that he already isn't a really good pro out there. He is. Like Zay Flowers can be pressed, he can run routes. It's not that he can't. I just think that he'd be better suited, as I think a lot of people would, in that slot role, which is where everybody initially had him projected because of his frame, because of the rack ability. I think you'd rather have him in the slot against safeties, linebackers, and then you could have, to your point, a much bigger target for Lamar for the downfield stuff. Again, not that Zay can't do that. I just think he would be better in the slot, and you could have somebody who has better skill for the outside. And then all of a sudden, we have a lot of different, like we said, that really is the flaw in the Ravens roster. I lied. The one flaw is that a lot of the receivers have the exact same skill set.
Well,
and they
even Devontae Walker, the wide receiver out of North Carolina they drafted. I mean, we'll move on. This is all like issues we've talked about the last couple of years with the Ravens. But I mean, for example, like I think Devonta Smith is a very, very, very good receiver. But would he be nearly as good if AJ Brown wasn't there? I still think he'd be pretty good. But I think being that number kind of 1B in that offense helps him a lot. And I think that would do the same for Zay Flowers if T. Higgins was there.
No, 100%. I agree with you. And it's actually shocking that the Ravens have gone this long without trying to get the alpha because, and that's where it gets kind of interesting is because
they had Hollywood Brown. Yeah. And they have Bateman. I don't know.
I just feel like you gave a solid chunk of money to OBJ, and it's like you definitely could have gone other areas with that money. That's all. That's really all. I'll just leave it at that.
Moving into the Cincinnati Bengals, we both have them as Super Bowl contenders. I think this is one of the teams that I think with Joe Burrow, they will always be Super Bowl contenders, in my opinion, kind of similar to like Josh Allen with the Bills. I think this year is a very pressing year, though. Trey Hendrickson requesting a trade, getting a little bit older. T. Higgins is probably going to be gone. I assume that's why you drafted Jermaine Burton in the third. I know a lot of people were really high on him without the off-field issues, so he could potentially just be that replacement. And obviously, you have Amarius Mims, who's ready to back up Trent Brown, Orlando Brown Jr., but the Jamar Chase extension is coming. A lot of important decisions for the Bengals this coming offseason. I feel like they have to kind of try to get it done this year. I mean, they can get it done other years, but I think this is their ideal year to try to win it.
Yeah, I think we're starting to look at the issues where it's like you said, Joe Burrow, when he's there, they're always going to be a competitive team. I'm not even going to, that's really what it is. It's like, I'm always going to view them as a Super Bowl contender if Joe Burrow's there. You said it best. But like, to all your points, there's certainly not that flawless roster that we were kind of just talking about with the Ravens. Like, you can poke a lot of holes at the Bengals roster. And the biggest issue is that a lot of guys, like you're saying, they're getting older, that have played bigger roles on the team that got to Super Bowl in the past. Like, the guys that were the big playmakers on that roster, a lot of them are not very old now, but much older than they were then, and where they're kind of starting to push that range where they're not going to be able to produce as much. You got to start really, really replacing a lot of very important guys that were a part of this team for a long time. And I think that does create kind of a rough transition period. I don't want to make any comparisons, but like, because this is what I will say about the Bengals, especially if Joe Burrow still struggles with health again. I think we could see a period of time here potentially where, especially if they don't get it done this year, the Bengals could go through a few year stretch, that a few teams that have had legendary quarterbacks have gone through, where even though you have a legendary quarterback, you kind of struggle, you miss the past few years, and you kind of have to like find your footing again with a new core. That very well could be the Bengals soon enough. But until I see that happen, I have to still have them as a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, I mean, they're just one of those teams, like I said. If you have one of the top 5, top 6 quarterbacks, you're going to be a Super Bowl contender every year just because of how much they elevate the team, especially if you have like a semi-competent defense, which the Bengals, I mean, I think a big issue last year with them was their safety play, and they went out and got Geno Stone. They brought back Von Bell, so they have addressed that issue. Sheldon Rankins comes in to replace DJ Reader, so that's going to be an interesting kind of transition as well. I think the biggest thing too is how dominant can their defensive line be. I think that's going to be a big thing on their defense because their cornerback room, it's okay, but it's nothing special. So if your guys aren't getting to the quarterback, I feel like it's going to be a little bit tougher on their secondary. But
yeah, there's a lot of questions this year about the Bengals, but it's like you said, with Joey B there, and if he's healthy, he'll find a way to push this team higher than they should be.
Moving into the Cleveland Browns, we have them as a playoff team with the strength of their defense and with Deshaun Watson coming back. As long as he can play average football, they should be a playoff lock. Like, if they don't make the playoffs, the Watson experiment, in my opinion, is a failure, a massive failure.
Yeah, I don't even know where you'd go from there. We'll save that for if that somehow happens. I think here's what I wanted to say to Browns fans, just so they don't kill me in the comments. Look, I really wanted to have them as Super Bowl contenders, and I do think that. Look, I'm being hypocritical here, but like, you're gonna get what I'm saying. It's like we said, which one do you lean towards? Like, at their absolute ceiling, could they find a way to make a Super Bowl run this year? Like, yeah, it's in the realm of possibility, but it's like we said, like when I was leaning, I was like, well, I lean much more that like, I haven't seen Deshaun get anywhere close back to what old Deshaun was. And until I see that happen, it's like, with all the quarterbacks you're going to have to go through in the AFC and the gauntlet you're going to have to get through, you're basically saying this defense is going to have to play perfect football the entire playoffs. And there's going to be a lot of things that have to go perfect. So in terms of where I lean them being a high, conference chip appearance type playoff team, but I don't lean seeing them be a Super Bowl champion this year.
No, I don't either. And it's just when you look at the teams in this Super Bowl kind of contending window, Dolphins, high-powered offense. Jets, high-power offense. Well, this year, not last year. Eagles, high-power offense. Ravens, potentially high-power offense. Bengals, high-power offense. The Browns, they just don't have that high-power offense. It's not bad, but Jerry Jeudy is your number 2. I really like Amari Cooper, but is he talked about? Not talked about a lot because he's in Cleveland, probably. But the reality is, I would take a lot of guys over Amari Cooper to be my wide receiver 1. I think that's a fair statement. So while I do think they can compete in the playoffs, I just don't know if I can see them beating any of these AFC teams in the championship.
Yeah, well, that's the biggest problem, and it is. Like I love Amari Cooper too. I think Amari's not even the problem. It's just because, like to your point, Amari, I think Amari's at his best when it's like because that's kind of really the issue is how everything's set up. I think you're at your peak with Amari when you can really rotate him a lot and you can have him inside here, outside here, and you can really mess with defenses and toy with them and because he's one of those very versatile guys you can play him anywhere. But with the way the Browns are set up, you really don't have that luxury because it's not like you're going to be throwing Elijah Moore and Jerry Jeudy on your as your X and Y. It's just not viable. At that point, we're sacrificing more than we're getting from putting Amari in the slot. That's kind of the problem. It's just, in my opinion, the way the Browns have this offense even set up, the receiving room set up, you kind of limit Amari's pure skill set because you're getting the most out of him when you can really move around a lot and have him be that chess piece that he was his whole career before he ended up in Cleveland. And not that Cleveland hasn't utilized him well because he's had productive numbers here, but I just think you could be getting more out of him. I'm not a huge fan of the receiving room. Elijah Moore has not panned out to what we thought he was going to be. Again, I always own up to my takes. Incredibly high on Elijah Moore coming out of college. I don't know. I remember how you felt, but I think you were pretty high on him too.
I
But he
liked
definitely is
him.
not.
I was very high after his first season with the Jets, and then I just don't know what happened.
He hasn't panned out to be the guy we thought he was going to. Sometimes it happens. It's no discredit to the man. He's still out here working his ass off. He's still a professional, but the reality is he isn't the guy, at least at this point in his career, I thought he was. And I'm just not a fan of the receiving room all in all. I feel like there's just a lot to be desired in terms of the receiving room. And with Deshaun Watson not playing great ball, that leaves a lot of questions on the table.
Yeah, so moving into one of the easiest teams probably to pick is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And there's really only two options for this one. It's wild card team or 500. And with the pedigree of Mike Tomlin, I'm going to go ahead and put wild card team, and that's both what we had. I mean, if Russell Wilson plays all 17 games, their offensive line is an improvement of last year. Their defense is probably going to be better. They should have a better offense with Art Smith. The run game should be better. Like, they should be a wild card team. But if you want to take a look at the Pittsburgh Steelers schedule, it's kind of brutal. Like, look at the last couple weeks of their schedule. It is Cincinnati, Kansas City, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Baltimore. And that's all after week 10. Week 10 is Washington, and then you get a gauntlet. So the first part of the schedule is a little bit easier, but there's still some teams in there like Dallas, New York, Indianapolis. So they relatively could be a 500 team. But, we've seen with the Steelers, they're able to squeak out tough games because of the coaching, because of the pedigree of the defense, and everything like that. So they could be a wild card team. I don't see them winning the wild card game, though. So, with George Pickens being your wide receiver one, I like George Pickens, but I don't know.
See, that's my biggest thing too, is like I think like, and I'm with you, yeah, like there's no doubt. We can't with Mike Tomlin, we can't sell him any lower than we have him. But you have a great D line and the defense. Look, if Joey Porter Jr. can really take a step forward this year, like there's not that many questions about the D back room, right? There's definitely there's guys now all of a sudden, right? You added Patrick Queen, like the defense. I'm not even really like. There's a lot of good things on the defense, right? We come over to the offense. And basically, at this point, you already have Roman Wilson as your number 2 wide receiver. And Roman Wilson coming out, I'm a fan of him, but throwing him into that wide receiver 2 role right away, it might be a tough ask that rookie year where we don't know what in terms of production what to expect. And then for wide receiver 3, we have Van Jefferson, who unfortunately has just never really found a way to become, very productive in the NFL. He's not. He's one of the, to put it as nicely as possible, he's one of the best matchups you can get as a cornerback statistically right now in the league. So it's like, I think there's a lot to be desired on the offensive side of the ball. And we look, as much as we love the offensive line prospects that they brought in, all 3 of them, as much as I love a prospect, that never is going to translate that I'm going to love you as a pro. So there's a lot of questions all in all about the offense. And there's a lot of questions we have to see answered before that we can see them as anything more than just a wild card team at best, or a 500 range.
As we move into the